Oh, hey, didn't see you guys there. I was actually just up in the AWS game zone playing Dead by Daylight by BHVR Interactive.
That sounds fun.
Wait, we're live?
We're live.
Hey, well, gang's all here. So, speaking of Dead by Daylight, we have a really exciting session here. We've got some amazing guests. We're actually going to talk a little bit about Dead by Daylight and some of the work that goes into making such an amazing game. Yeah. So, going down the aisle here, my name is Nick Walsh, and I'm a technical evangelist at Amazon Web Services. And I'm joined by my coworker down the other end.
Hey everyone, I'm Gabe Hollenby, also a tech evangelist for AWS.
And I'm Marc-Etienne Derry. I'm a tech lead in BHVR for backend services.
And I am David Laperle, and I'm a technical producer for the backend services.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for joining us, Marc-Etienne and David. So you are the perfect folks to have with us here. So again, I was up playing Dead by Daylight in the AWS game zone. Thanks for keeping everyone busy while I came back. But there's a few exciting things that I think the folks at home, especially players of Dead by Daylight, would appreciate knowing. So in Dead by Daylight, I know there's been a recent move to trying to get dedicated servers instead of having games hosted directly on some of the players' clients. Can we talk a little bit more about that? It sounds like a really exciting game change.
Yeah, sure. Since Dead by Daylight is now moving into new platforms, it was important for us to be able to support dedicated servers to remove the dependency on the client. So this is what happened. It's been announced a few months ago, and we're still working on it very hard in order to bring that level of quality expected from our players.
Yeah.
So this is a common move that a lot of game developers make at some point or another.
Yeah.
Right? It's often easier to start with no dedicated servers for a number of reasons. Oftentimes a lot of frameworks that we use to make games have built-in local server multiplayer capabilities. But other times, it's just that it's one less moving part to have to manage or even think about. So what prompted you to make those changes, and what benefits are you getting now that you're doing it?
There's two things. The first one is for cheating purposes. I mean, when you do host on the client, there's all possibilities for cheating because you should never rely on the client to give you information. So that's why we're moving to dedicated server. I believe this the best reason for it, but it will also give us possibility to take action on bad behavior when users leave matches and stuff like that. We'll be able to report on that and be able to take action immediately, and don't wait for user reports. So that's the two main reasons why it was important for us to move to dedicated servers.
And from a packaging and compiling perspective, now instead of the game clients independently either connecting to other clients or hosting themselves, what does that look like? Are there any services that help you actually run Dead by Daylight game servers in the cloud?
Yes. We run our own matchmaking services, but we are using GameLift to provide dedicated servers for all the games across, for everyone playing Dead by Daylight.
Great, and just to add a little more color to that, you said GameLift, referring to AWS GameLift, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and GameLift is a service for game studios and providers to be able to submit a packaged version of their server-side sort of code that runs, or the game server essentially. And GameLift helps to scale that out to any sort of number of concurrent servers at one time, helps you to distribute that across multiple regions and so on. So all you have to do as a game developer is show up and upload in a zip file your game server, and you don't have to worry about the underlying managing and provisioning of the infrastructure.
Will it also handle getting people matched with a server like geographically close to them, or other sort of player lobby things that you need out of a game server in matchmaking?
Well, on the matchmaking side, we need to make sure to find players that are close together, but then GameLift allows us to actually use a server that are closest to our players, so that way they can have the better latency.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, when you're thinking about how you match players together, there are so many different knobs you can turn, right?
Absolutely.
You may want a maximum time that people are in the matchmaking queue so that they're not waiting for hours and hours and hours just to ensure that there's a narrow band of skill. And conversely, you don't want players that are all connected together that may have wildly different pings. So it's a careful balancing act, but I know that in GameLift in particular, you can actually set configurations and weights to all of these different parameters so that you can achieve the exact experience that you want for your players.
Yeah, it's actually something that we tweak a lot in our matchmaking application, just to make sure that we, like you said, that we find the right matches for people, or that there's a balancing act between like finding match quickly or finding the best match for the player. So we're trying to find the perfect balance.
Yep. And let's not forget that Dead by Daylight is an asymmetrical game. So you get a queue for killers and a queue for survivors. You need to match the survivors together, and killer needs to go hunt those survivors. It's kind of weird to explain that to people, but it's kind of different because if you're waiting to play as a killer, you might wait longer or less longer depending on all those factors.
Because there will always be less killers than survivors in the game matchups.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. So that's a great deep dive on how you're changing the player experience for the better through a technological initiative. Yes. Maybe something that may not be as apparent to players at first glance. I know you're doing a lot in the analytics space and introducing new types of pipelines to be able to process your data and gain new insights. Is there anything there that you think is really exciting?
I'm going to explain the story behind it, and Marc-Etienne will cover the technical part just to be sure I don't say anything wrong.
That's a good partnership. That's why you're both on stage.
Yeah, that's why we've got both of you. Redundancy, right?
Yeah, exactly. So basically the idea was to provide a live ops management tool so that it's easier for our production team to be able to schedule a campaign, to do segmentation and do stuff like that. So the idea behind it was, at first we looked at it as an analytics problem. So how do we gather enough data so that we can build analytics? But in the end we realized that the real value to that was to actually be able to take action on those metrics and transform this data that will be looked at by analysts into real action. So product manager can schedule campaigns, they can schedule actions that will lead to actual results in the game. So that was exactly what led to building that architecture that allowed us to do that. And Marc-Etienne will explain that setup better than me.
Yeah.
I want to ask, what kinds of data bits are you collecting?
I mean, we're collecting mostly action. I mean, we're collecting whenever the player logs in, whenever they do a matchmaking action, what kind of player do we have, like what they're doing in their match, like how much skill do they get, and all that kind of stuff. So that way we can actually tweak the balance of the game, or we can just see like the monetization of the game.
Are you also doing things like where players are standing in the maps to learn about like hotspots or ways to tweak your level design?
Yes, I mean there's a lot of things that we're looking to use our data to actually in terms of game design as well. But also one of the key points with our data pipeline that maybe David forgot to mention is we have, whenever we design this data, it's good to have data, but you need to know what you have in terms of data because of things like GDPR. So whenever we design this analytic pipeline, we try to make sure that everything that gets in our data lake, we know where it's coming from and we know what is in it. So what we did is we use Kinesis Firehose to actually take data from our backend services and put it into an S3 bucket. And from that point, we have a Lambda function that gets triggered on a reception of the event, where we actually we take action on those objects. So what we do is we actually validate all of those events. So prior to sending stuff to our data lake, we need to create an event schema that defines what fields are going to be in this event. So that way, we don't make mistake through stuff that shouldn't be in this data lake. Yep. So we actually validate that if the data is correct or not before actually copying into another bucket, which is our final data lake, that we then query using Athena.
Wonderful, and in the way you've described this data pipeline that you've crafted, it seems pretty agnostic to whatever types of features may be coming downstream, right? Yeah. So we mentioned before that, this is the first step of being able to then implement new features. Yeah. Interesting ones that come to mind for me, different haunt spots on the map, or the spots where people may want to camp, understanding what win rates correlate to certain spots on the map and being able to tweak this balance. But again, you have to harp on the fact that none of these insights are available to you if you can't get your ducks in a row with respect to your data pipeline. And you mentioned you use Kinesis, so you can get these events in real time. There are even scenarios I can imagine where you can have dynamic player experiences if you have NPCs and bots or what have you in real time based on events and the data that's being fed in.
That's
so
right.
you could have really interesting sort of dynamics, not just game over game differences, but within a game, games can play out differently depending on how the environment changes or how players are interacting.
Yeah. Exactly.
And if you build a campaign with segments, you're able to act on those segments right away. So the system, Marc-Etienne can explain that part as well, but we built an aggregate system where we maintain a list of aggregates for every user, so that product manager, they can actually build campaign based on those aggregates and not rely to actually query the raw data set, which can be very time consuming and costly and stuff like that. So we'd rather have that aggregate system where all important information, they would be in the same location and easy to use by the product management team.
Yeah. So have you been able to get any real concrete benefits from the analytics that you've been doing so far?
I mean, we have a team dedicated to doing that type of work,
Okay.
and I'm sure they get a lot of results in their own stuff. For our live op management tool, we're still in the early stages,
Okay.
so it's not yet deployed
Okay.
on Dead by Daylight, but this is something that we've been working on to bring to them as soon as possible.
It sounds like a lot of games would benefit from that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And the way that the system is designed is we have a second Kinesis fire hose that go into an S3 bucket as well. And then we have a Lambda that will actually, what it does, it actually aggregate the data from a player. And then actually the bucket is actually containing every event from the game. And actually what it does, this Lambda, is it will aggregate the data and then store it into Aurora serverless database. So that way, our backend servers can actually query this data and to decide, like, let's say we store data like the amount of kill that this player did, or the last time that this player logged in. So then we can we can segment player based on those fields.
Are you using any sort of caching layer? So, I mean, this Lambda is going to have to look up the current state of your aggregate in order to add new state to it.
Yeah, so
is there
we're
some
using Redis for this
Okay.
purposes. Yeah.
Is that a managed Redis with
Yes,
Elastic
managed Redis for Memcache.
Great.
Through AWS Elasticache.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. We're just calling out all the AWS services here. But this has been a great segue into the conversation around breaking up a monolith, right? So again, when you first launch, it may be easier, or you can go faster to market by releasing your game with the client and the server all bundled together. But decoupling this to have dedicated game servers is what sounds like the first step in a very large adventure of trying to decouple your other services. What does that journey look like for your team at Behavior?
One of the things regarding the monolithic application that we had is that at Behavior we have a backend services that is used by Dead by Daylight, but it's also used by other teams and other projects. So we distribute our backend service to many teams. Each team have their own way of using that, so it gets complicated to manage that monolith to make it grow as we would like it to go. So one of the problem that we had is that we needed to start introduce changes without impacting that monolith to bring as less bugs as possible into the games. And this is when we decided that the best approach would be to move away from the monolith and develop each new services as a microservice that would be kind of satellite around the big monolith, and slowly move services from the big one to the small microservices, and help the team migrate from the big one to the small services. And in that way, we can do some kind of a granular migration and not have one big piece of code change at one moment in time. So this is a big decision how we made it, but exactly how it's prepared, I'll let Marc-Etienne take it from here.
Yeah, so what we're actually working on right now is we're actually extracting a small part of this monolithic application into microservices, and actually one by one we're trying to move them. And since the way that we do extension within our application before is we have this monolithic application, and then the game team will apply some modification on the code itself within this monolithic application, which will give us the final image that we will deploy at the end. So because of that, we have kind of a dependency between the extension code and our own code base. So right now, what we'll be doing is we'll move our internal code into a microservice, and internally we'll redirect every function call that were previously inside the monolithic application to this new service. And
right, so it's proxying so that you don't have to
yeah.
change as much code all at once.
Yeah, exactly. Our goal is, because Dead by Daylight is running right now and other games are running on our service, we want to avoid any major change and really granularly change stuff.
Good.
Yeah, and it acts as well as a kill switch, meaning that we can switch back from the old version to the new version live without having to deploy new code. It was for us the biggest choosing point to make sure that we can kill our new microservice if we need to without impacting the game or having to release a new version of the code.
Yeah, and I'd say that's a really interesting call out. When companies are trying to migrate from the monolith to a microservice architecture, there's this myth sometimes that they have to have this entire migration where they then flip the switch and it's like, all right, I am now monolith and I am now a microservice.
Yeah.
And that's not really the case, right?
No.
You mentioned here where you had proxy APIs that enable you to have kill switches and sort of two-way doors where you can do iterative deployments where you're actually tracking and reducing the blast radius of each one of these individual changes.
Yeah.
And that's something that, again, a lot of folks that are sort of dragging the knees through the mud on that type of type of migration aren't always aware that that's how a lot of companies are actually doing it.
Yeah,
it's really
because
good to hear that story.
it's a risky move to change a lot of code. So we try to mitigate that, but reducing the risk that we can face in production.
I have a microservices question.
Yeah.
How are you deploying and managing these microservices? What's your strategy there?
I mean, right now we're switching the way that we were deploying. Before we were using in GitLab, we were having like a full CD script to deploy using Chef. But now we're moving into using another tool, which is Argo CD, that we use to actually deploy all of our code. So what we actually do is we're having a GitHub solution. So we modify we modify our Git repository, and then once we merge this code, it then update our infrastructure.
And these services are running on like EC2 boxes?
They're running on Kubernetes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've actually got some interesting call-outs from chat. So LeCube Dude was watching the keynote before and saw some of the launches around AWS local zones and wavelength, and they're really excited to see those hopefully get integrated into their favorite game, which is Dead by Daylight.
It's kind of funny that you bring that up because we had a talk with the game tech team like earlier this afternoon, and we asked the same question regarding the local zones.
Yep.
And I don't know I can go into that, but the answer from the game tech team was positive. Where a local zone should be able to be used by GameLift, so that we should be able to do that in the future.
Yeah.
So of course there's no timeline for it, but as soon as it's available, you can be sure that we're going to work on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's riff on that for a second because we got a few minutes left.
Yeah.
So when you have the model that you talked about before, which is where the game server lives locally on one of the clients, in this case the hunter or the killer, you can simply matchmake a bunch of other people that are close to that player and ensure that you have somewhat decent ping. The value of something like local zones or the multiple points of presence with the AWS backbone is that you can actually get a game server as close as possible to the player so that even though it doesn't live on any individual player in that match's computer, it's hopefully close enough to all of them that the ping difference is mutual and hopefully very low between all of them.
It's very important for a game like this where it's really painful for the players if you try to hit someone and from your point of view that person should be down but it's not. So we understand that. So it's important that we bring as many fleets as possible. Fleets are a group of GameLift servers. So it's important for us to bring that as close as possible to the player, and local zones are gonna help for that a lot.
Yeah, so, I mean we see this in so many games. It's often referred to as like peaker's advantage.
Yeah.
Or if again you've played a game where there aren't dedicated servers, you feel that difference when you're the host or when someone else is the host. And ultimately by having these localized game servers, it prevents that one person who has high ping from disrupting the match in one way or another. They're not rubber banding around the map, they're not having a terrible experience themselves, and so on. So even some exciting launches here at reInvent that you're looking to get.
Yeah, and I mean, a ping of 0 is always better than a ping of 100,
We can't all live in the data center. Come on.
Some of us are lucky to live in a town that has an AWS data center in it. So.
Yeah, and again, I know that these are concepts that we speak about, ad infinitum when it comes to applications that are distributed in multiple regions and so on. But to this day, there are still many, many games that don't have a large number of hyperlocal POPs or game servers for them, and so you feel that difference. You buy a game and maybe a AAA title, and you sign in, and not just to realize that your minimum ping you'll ever play that game on could be 70, 80, 90 because the servers are on the other side of the country.
Yeah.
And that's not a great player experience. Like the game feels completely differently when you're playing on a server that's 70 milliseconds ping away compared to 5, 10, 15. And so it's really awesome to hear that you're helping to reduce this even further for your players.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, we've only got a few seconds left, so I guess it's time for us to sign off here. But if you are here at reInvent, you can actually go and play Dead by Daylight here at the AWS Game Zone. That's where I was seconds before we went live. That's going to be at the 4th floor of the Venetian. There's a big orange sign, a bunch of PCs and consoles. Can't really miss it. But otherwise, where can players follow along or developers that are interested in hearing more about changes in Dead by Daylight?
Sorry about, I didn't hear it.
Yeah, where can players and developers at home follow along for the latest updates?
Well, I'm pretty sure there's a Twitter Dead by Daylight. I cannot give you the name. I mean, don't worry.
I'll get it in
marketing,
chat.
But I'm pretty sure you can figure that one in the chat. Yeah, social network and our website is the best place to get all news from the game.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, David. Thank you, Marc Etienne. Again, technical producer on backend services and backend technical lead from BHVR Interactive, producers of Dead by Daylight. Thank you again.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, guys.
Yep.
And thanks
we'll
for
be
watching.
back with
Stay
more
with us.
content. Yep. See you soon.